I want to be in 2 Kings tonight, 2 Kings chapter 6 and 7. In verse 8, now the king of Aram was warned against Israel. He counseled with his servants, saying, in such and such a camp, such and such a place shall be my camp. The man of God, Elisha at the time, told the king of Israel, says, don't go by that place. Beware. The enemy is going to be camped there. And he would go and check it out. And he'd find, well, that was the case. Not just once, but twice in verse 10. The king of Aram was enraged. He was real angry that he was trying to set up an ambush for the Israelites. And every ambush he set up, nobody ever came along. He tried to set a trap. And he told his servants, will you tell me which one of you is for the king of Israel? Who's tipping off the Israelites about my movements? And in verse 12, nobody. His servants told him, nobody. Rather, there's a prophet down in Israel, and he knows what you say in your bedroom. That's how much he knows about your movements and your plans. I think that's a great lesson just right there of how a number of times in the Old Testament, it's not the person in a position of authority that has the answer. It's the common guy that has the answer. The average guy has the answer. It's like the little servant girl back in chapter 5. It was the little servant girl who knew about the prophet in Israel, not somebody else, not Naaman or someone in a position of power. And I was just kind of thinking that, there are people in this country that are in high positions of power that don't know you have to be baptized to be saved. They don't know that. I mean, you know that, but they don't. They might not know the principles that make a marriage work, but you know the principles that make a marriage work. Some of the most basic truths that you just take for granted, they may be completely unaware of those principles. In verse 13, so he said, go and see where he is, that I may send and take him. And it was told him, saying, behold, he's in Dothan. And that's kind of interesting. If here's a guy who knows all my movements, and I'm going to try to capture him. That doesn't make any sense at all. Wouldn't he already know if he knows what you're speaking in your bedroom? Wouldn't he know your plans to go and get him? But people don't do smart things when they don't believe in God. And then we go a little farther, and Elisha's attendant, his servant, went out one morning and looked around, and there's the Arameans surrounding the city. And he goes into Elisha in verse 15 and says, what shall we do? And Elisha says in verse 16, don't be afraid, because there's more on our side than with them. And then he prayed that God would help this man see what was out there, and he, behold, the hills were just full of chariots of fire, or angelic hosts, or the armies of heaven were out there. And then Elisha prays that the Lord strike the king of Aram with blindness, and the troops with blindness, and it happened. And he went out there and told them, this is not the city. I will show you where the man you're looking for is. And Elisha takes them to the capital city, to Samaria in Israel, and there they recover from their blindness. And the king of Israel sees all these hostile foreign troops right there in his city and says, shall I kill them? And Elisha says, no, you don't kill people you capture, you feed them. Feed them and send them on their way. And that's what they do. Yet chapter 6:24 says, it came about that after this, that here we have the king of Aram, after all of this, once again attacks Israel. And I don't get that. You've been told that they've got a guy that knows your every thought and deed, even in your bedroom. And then this prophet has just graciously saved the entire lives of all your army. Some point recently, we don't know, within the last year or a couple of years or whatever. No time is given here. And we're going to attack these people? We're going to try to attack them again? You see, Elisha has healed Naaman of leprosy, their top general in chapter 5. And they know all about his power because he knows exactly where they're always at. And they witness his power when God strikes them with blindness, a whole army. And then they're fed. They're given a covered dish, supper. They're taken to a potluck and then sent home with some lovely parting gifts from Sarah Coventry and things like that. And yet all these valuable lessons, and then here they are attacking Israel again. And it just reminds me that you can really forget a whole lot. Valuable lessons can be lost in 1 or 2 generations. I know sometimes you start thinking, maybe we would have, if God would work a miracle out there among the lost, like a big miracle, that would help people come to Christ. And I was thinking, no. Remember what the rich man was told. They have Moses and the prophets. And they won't be persuaded if someone rises from the dead if they don't accept Scripture. If God worked a miracle today, if there was some great miracle that was done today that God worked, there would be people on the internet tonight writing a blog about trying to discredit it or say it never happened or here was the cause. And you know that you've seen stuff happen like that already in our lifetime of just clear events, and then you hear all these people second-guessing the events. And 10 or 20 years, some people, even 5 years, some people can say, well, that never happened. And you know what? I started thinking to myself of, time is not really the issue when it comes to the events in the Bible, as far as how long ago they happened. In John chapter 20, verse 31, many other signs, therefore, Jesus also performed in the presence of disciples. It doesn't really matter if that was 6 months ago or 2,000 years ago. That really is pretty much irrelevant as far as how much time has gone by. Because if you don't want to believe, then the day after Jesus worked a miracle, you have been trying to come up with another explanation. If you want to believe, then you'll believe in that 3,000 years after the event took place. And so time is never an issue. And I'm just surprised that the king there of that country, after all the miracles and kindness that his people have seen, he's back there again attacking God's people. As if Naaman was never healed, as if it wasn't demonstrated to him that prophet knows everything you're doing, as if his army had never been struck with blindness and treated with some mercy. It's interesting in this section. It's an interesting as far as contrast between individuals in 2 Kings chapters 6 and 7, because you have the language of unbelief, like the king who says, everybody's against me. Which one of you is telling on me? Well, no one's against you. And then let's make a plan to go and get that guy who knows all my plans. That's the language of unbelief. And then Elisha's servant who says, we're surrounded. And then you have the language of faith where the king's servant saying, no one's against you here. No one's plotting against you. They've got a prophet in Israel. And then the language of Elisha who says, we're not surrounded, they're surrounded. We're not at a disadvantage, they're at a disadvantage. We're here, then they're this little inner circle, but outside of that little inner circle is a real big circle of angels and the armies of heaven. I guess as a congregation, we need to remind the world of that there's certainly elements in this culture that don't like us and what we stand for, but we have to understand that, hey, you can see us and you don't like, but you need to look behind you. Be aware of the chariots of fire behind you. See, I can see you and the chariots of fire behind you. So don't mess with God's people, because behind you are the chariots of fire and God's judgment. In chapter chapter 6 and 7, we encounter a famine, a great famine, as often happened when cities were surrounded in the ancient world. In verse 25, there was a great famine in Samaria. Behold, they besieged it until a donkey's head was sold for 80 shekels of silver, and a fourth of a cab of dove's dung. Woo, there's something to say 3 times fast. For 5 shekels of silver. That's a famine. Maybe I won't complain about that restaurant that wants $14 for a cheeseburger. Sounds like we're still doing pretty good. At least I don't have to say, well, I guess all I can afford is a donkey's head. That just doesn't sound like a good dinner to me. As the king of Israel was passing by in the wall, a woman cried out to him, saying, "Help, my lord, O king." And he said, "If the Lord does not help you, where shall I help you? From the threshing floor or from the winepress?" And the king said to her, "What is the matter with you?" And she answered, "This woman said to me, 'Give your son that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow.' So we boiled my son and ate him. And I said to her on the next day, 'Give your son that we may eat him.' But she has hidden her son." That example has always really stuck with me. What do you do? What do you do as a king when someone comes up and said, "A lady convinced me to eat my child today, and she guaranteed me that we would eat her child the next day"? What do you do? May I suggest to you that there's really nothing you can do. As a Christian, I think we might not encounter that, but we encounter a lot of situations like that someone comes up with a problem that was 20, 30 years in the making and says, "Fix this," and we have to say, "I can't fix it." There is no solution for that. There's no fix for that. So we boiled him and ate him. Isn't there something within you that should have said, "No, that's not a good idea"? You know what impresses me about this situation is that some people might look at this and say, "Well, this is famine, and this is like as hard as it gets, and this is just one of those situations where kind of the rules don't apply anymore, that it's such a difficult situation that morality, you kind of have to set morality aside to survive." And you know what caught my attention? What caught my attention is that other woman didn't eat her son. That the other woman, even though she didn't have a whole lot of moral principles, still had one left. "We are not eating my son. I'm going to hide him." And it just reminds me of people that want me and you to sacrifice first, then bail. You do that. It reminded me as a teenager when you would have friends that would say, "Come on, let's see how fast your car can go." But they never do that in their own car. "Oh, hey, why don't you peel out?" There's some girls that want you to peel out, but they would never do that in their own car. And kind of be aware of people like that come up and want you to do something, but when it comes down to it, they would never do the same thing with their stuff. Here's a woman who kind of argues, "The situation demands it, but I'm not going to do that. I mean, I'm not going to eat my son." That other woman does not feel that the situation is so crucial that she's going to sacrifice the life of her son. I don't know, and I read through here, it's kind of interesting about this king. When the king heard the words, he tore his clothes. And the people actually saw that, verse 30. "And behold, he had sackcloth beneath his body." I'm not sure if there's any significance as far as why the sackcloth was underneath his garments. Is it that he was, I'm kind of remorseful, but I don't want to wear it on the outside. I don't want people looking like I'm remorseful. I still want to have my royal robes on. When he tore it, they could see what was underneath. But it was covered up. It was covered up by his other garments. The king is interested in verse 30. He said, may God do so to me and more also if the head of Elisha remains on him today. And then the king says in verse 33, behold, this evil is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer? Here we have a good example of someone who tears his clothes, but there's no repentance. There's no movement back to God. It's Elisha's fault. Not that we're so wicked up here and so evil up here, but it's Elisha's fault. Not that we're rebellious up here, but it's Elisha's fault all this is happening. And you know what? You might say, why would he say it's Elisha's fault? It could be, if Elisha had killed that army early on, they would not be surrounding us. If that army that came into our city earlier that we fed, if we'd wiped them out, we would not be in famine right now. See, it's Elisha's fault for telling us to spare that army, because that army's come back to attack us. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer? I think a lot of people say that. I've been trying to do the right thing and I don't get rewarded for it. Seem to get punished for it. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer? Why should I wait for God to show up? Why? Because he's shown up before. He delivered before. A few verses above this he delivered. He had delivered very recently. He was already working a deliverance. I hope that's a lesson I walk away from, is that typically when you're tempted to say, I do the right thing and I don't seem to get rewarded for it. I don't seem to get any sort of credit for it. Often, just about the time I've seen people give up. If they'd waited just a little bit longer, God showed up. But by that time, they've moved on. And without God, isn't this a good example of political helplessness? Why should I wait for the Lord any longer? Here is a king that has no solution. The solution is not, let's repent. Let's all be in sackcloth and ashes. Let's pray to God for forgiveness. That would have been a good solution. Let's call upon the Lord for help. That would have been a good solution. Let's get Elisha in here and talk to him about what we should do. We've got a prophet. Make use of him. No. It is this political helplessness. There's this kind of stalemate. There is this paralysis. I don't know, it reminds me a little bit of our country right now. Political helplessness. And when you don't turn to God, that's what you get. You get paralysis. A lot of us know what the solution is. Turn back to God. Turn to God. But when you don't do that, you get the end of chapter 6 and verse 33. We have some more individuals here. In verse 1, Elisha says, listen to the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord, tomorrow about this time a measure of fine flour shall be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel. Where? In the gate of Samaria. The royal officer in whose hand the king was leaning answered the man of God and said, behold, if the Lord should make windows in heaven, could this thing be? Then he said, behold, you shall see it with your own eyes, but you shall not eat of it. I can't wait. One man says, I can't wait for God to act, and the other man says, I can't believe that God would act. And we don't want to be either one. I can wait for God to act, and I know he will. Then we got some lepers in this section. Verse 3, there were 4 leprous men at the entrance of the gate, and they said to one another, why do we sit here until we die? If we say we shall enter the city, then the famine is in the city. We shall die there. And if we sit here, we shall die also. Now therefore come and let us go over to the camp of the Arameans. If they spare us, we shall live. And if they kill us, we shall but die. That's about the first smart thing anyone has said besides Elisha in the context. Isn't it? I mean, isn't that deathbed clarity? Isn't that the way that you want to be able to problem solve? Here we got these lepers, and they say, What are we doing? What are we doing? We stay here, we die. We go into town, famine there. No one's going to feed lepers. No one's going to say, oh, the poor lepers, would someone give them some bread? They don't have any bread. There ain't no children in there. No one's going to help us out. No one cares about us. What wonderful clarity. That's the type of clarity I want. Not on my deathbed. That's the type of clarity I want every day. When I'm able to see situations that clear. And that's the basis of the lesson is, what is the alternative? What is the alternative? We die. We stay here. We die if we stay here. We die if we go in there. At least if we go out to the enemy, we have a chance at life. After all they can do is kill us. That's all they can do. And that's going to happen anyway. So let's go. I love that statement, we shall but die. We shall but die. That's it. I mean, death is not the end. Matthew chapter 10:28. Don't be afraid of those that can kill the body. Don't be afraid of that person. Or Luke says, and after that, there's nothing else they can do. And I love that statement. I love that statement because it says that at death, you're untouchable. You die, no one can touch you. You're untouchable. You're one of the untouchables now, in the good sense of untouchable. I mean, no one can impact your eternal destiny. No one can hurt you anymore. Nobody can do anything to you anymore. It's kind of like the original Star Wars. Strike me down now, Darth, and I'll become more powerful than you can imagine. That's true of every Christian. I mean, strike me down now, and there's nothing else you can do. I become untouchable. I like that phrase, but die. Fear. Fear keeps a person from living. Fear will keep you in the famine. I think these lepers it's almost similar, I think, to almost what a person does when they go and they're converted to Christ somewhat. Is that there's so many people out there that really don't like where they are right now. But they're afraid of kind of the unknown of what the Christian life would be like. They're afraid of the challenge of living the Christian life, and so they stay where they are out of fear. And they'll die. They'll die in their sins. Luke chapter 15 and verse 17, the lepers remind me of the prodigal son, that one moment he wakes up in the pig pen and says, if I continue to stay here, I die. The lepers realized, yeah, it may be very fearful to go there to the foreign army. It may be fearful, like, if we go there, we may die today. If we stay at the city, we may die tomorrow or the next day. But if we actually go there, we may die actually today. Yeah, that's fearful. But if we don't go, guaranteed we will die. So if someone doesn't like the idea of God, what is the alternative? Well, if there's no God, then nothing matters, and you don't matter. That's not a very good alternative. You don't like the idea of absolute truth. What's the alternative? Well, it just means that everyone has their own truth, which means that everyone can do anything they want. That's not a very good alternative. And that they don't have to respect you at all. Because their truth might be, you don't matter. You don't understand why God allows the innocent to suffer? What's the alternative? Well, then innocent people suffer for no good reason. That's not a very good alternative. They don't like the rules the Bible places upon man. What's the alternative? Well, then you accept the rules man places upon man. That's not a very good alternative. They show up, and where'd everybody go? Nothing's there. Verse 5, they arose at twilight to go to the camp of the Arameans. When they came to the outskirts of the camp, behold, there was no one there. The Lord had caused the army to hear a sound of chariots, sound of horses, even the sound of a great army. So that they said to one another, behold, the king of Israel has hired against us the Hittites and the Egyptians. Therefore they arose and fled in the twilight and left their tents and their horses and their donkeys, even the camp just as it was, and fled for their life. When these lepers came to the outskirts of the camp, they entered one tent and ate and drank and carried from their silver, gold, clothes, and went and hid them. And they returned and entered another tent and carried them also and went and hid them. They show up, and dinner's prepared, candles are burning, tables are set, and nobody's there. And then I think a little bit later in the chapter, we've got like, if you've ever been like the Ross, Dress for Less, or the Burlington Coat Factory after like a busy weekend, and there are clothes all over the place. That's kind of what it looks like here, from here down to the Jordan. It just looks like, me and Cindy kid about Waterbed Warehouse. Years ago, Waterbed Warehouse would have these loud ads. Blow up, say, Waterbed Warehouse, Waterbed Warehouse. So anytime it goes somewhere and it's a chaotic madhouse, it's Waterbed Warehouse. And it was Waterbed Warehouse here. These people had just left and cast off some from them and just fled for their lives, leaving all their possessions behind them. You see, there's no death. There's no enemy. Now, in the moment, you've got greed. You've got gorging. You've got hiding and looting. That's the first response of the lepers. They start going in the tents and grabbing whatever they can grab. It's always frustrating that you can't carry everything, and you're always doing this. You're always doing this. Where you say, maybe I should take 2 trips. No, I'll try to get everything out of the car from church in 1 trip. And whoa, there goes my Bible. Whoa, there goes my wife's purse. So you're trying to get everything, and so that's what's going on here. And they're just like, they're like that madness look that a child gets at Chuck E. Cheese or the State Fair, where that madness tokens. I've got on more tokens. There's stuff in the display case, valuables in that display case, made out of beautiful plastic, rubber things that I will give my life for. That's what's going on here. Here's what I'm impressed by. Wait a minute. Here's when you change. Here's when you change. When you get a wait a minute moment. Wait a minute. 9. They said to one another, looks like they all kind of came to this conclusion somewhat simultaneously. We are not doing right. This is a day of good news, but we're keeping silent. If we wait until morning light, punishment will overtake us. Now therefore come, let us go and tell the king's household. There's so much truth in that statement. Those guys are so spot on. Here are men that have every incentive to do wrong. Every reason in the world to do wrong. And I can only think about one reason to do right. They could have said, those people in Samaria, they never helped us. They're not our friends. When we were we're lepers. Did they ever help you? What did they do to you? They made you an outcast. We ended up outside the city gate. We ended up outside. They never helped us. They didn't lift a finger for us. Yeah, they may have gave us a scrap now and then during the good times. Did those people ever show any compassion on us? Why should we help them now? They could have said that. Could have been very angry. They could have said, hey, little payback time. There's some payback time here. This is payback for all those times that you guys didn't talk to us and avoided us and were embarrassed about us and ashamed of us. Now, they could have said, yeah, we'll tell them in a couple of days. We'll tell them after we kind of went through and picked over what was here instead of want that, that, and that. We'll tell them once that we're good and we're just done and we have feasted for a couple of days. We'll tell them then. We're going to go through and get all the best here. They could have said, you know what? It's unfair that we're lepers, and I'm angry about being a leper, and I deserve this. I deserve this bounty that's just fallen into my lap. And we're not to tell anybody about this. And we're going to find some of those donkeys and find a couple carts and load up, and we're going to head off somewhere and start a new life. If they find out, it's fine, but we're taking our stuff and leaving. This is the chance. This is the chance to get out of town. Chance to start over. Go somewhere where nobody knows us. Or they could have said, God does not expect me to do the right thing because of how wretched I am. No one expects a leper to do the right thing. If we wait until morning, I'm impressed by that. If we wait until morning, punishment will overtake us. I mean, after going in there and eating good, you would think like, I feel like a nap about now. Yep. Anyone got a nail? Put another notch in my belt? Yeah. Got me a toothpick? Yep. I'm stuffed. And they could have said, I feel like a nap right now. But they didn't say that. They said, it's not good enough to tell them tomorrow. If we wait until tomorrow, that's sin. These lepers, to me, are saying, we are accountable. We are accountable to God even though we're lepers. We are accountable to God even though we're lepers in the middle of a famine. There are so many people out there that feel like I'm going through such a hardship, I'm going through such a hard time in my life that God cuts me slack. God cuts me slack. These guys are saying, we're lepers, yes. We're in the middle of famine, yes. God's not going to cut us any slack. If we don't go and tell them right now, and even if we wait a few hours in the morning, we're condemned and we're in sin. Wow. What a great lesson for us. Because it's a day of good news. I think this is a great lesson as far as if you ever think of like, is God going to judge me by a lesser standard because of something that I've gone through in my life? No. Well, God, what about this? God, I went through this, or this happened to me. God, does this make me somewhat less accountable? No, not at all. Jesus said, the word I spoke will judge you, judge you on the last day. And not a lesser standard. No matter what we go through, we are still as much accountable as anybody else. No more, no less. People are dying in the city of Samaria. I mean, we got famine there. There are people there, if they don't have something to eat, they may not make it till the next day. And people are dying in sin all around us. And there's a whole, I mean, is it I think, isn't there a neat parallel here of we're kind of like the lepers that have gone outside the city and we've stumbled onto this great camp of blessings? And there's food there. And there's wonderful blessings there. And everybody back there that we know, they're starving in famine. They're the ones fighting over the donkey's head. And we're the ones here with all this wonderful stuff. And I know if we go and tell them of all this wonderful stuff, they're not going to believe. Same thing here. Oh, it's a trick, it's not really out there. I don't know about that. I know, they face the same thing. But you got to tell them. That there's these great unclaimed blessings just awaiting you out there. And I've got them. I found some of them. They go back into town and tell him about that, and the king says in verse 12, I will now tell you what the Arameans have done to us. They know that we're hungry, therefore they have gone from the camp to hide themselves in the fields, saying, when they come out of the city, we shall capture them alive and get into the city. And once again you have servants to the rescue. Please let some men take 5 of the horses which remain, which are left in the city. Behold, they will be in any case like all the multitude of Israel who are left in it. Behold, they will be who have already perished. So can we just go out to sea? Because if we don't go out to sea, we're going to die anyway. Again, what's the alternative? The language of unbelief here is it's not good. It's a trap, or I like the servants that have the attitude is, the king might say it's not going to work. And I like what the servants are saying. It looks like what you're doing right now is not working well. And I like that too. To someone who's not a Christian, who says, I don't know about that, it has to be better than what you're doing right now. We know a lot of people that we can honestly tell them, it's not working for you what you're doing right now. Isn't it worth at least trying something better? Because obviously what you're doing right now, it's not working too good. There's some big downsides of what you're doing right now. There has to be something better. As we close the lesson, God said it, and it will come true. God made the prediction, and it happened. The man who said, I can't believe that, if God would open up the windows of heaven, I don't see how God would feed all of us, and it happened. And he was there holding the gate, and he was in the way, and he got run over by the crowd. He got trampled to death. And I think a good lesson there is just when it comes to God's blessings, just don't get in the way. There may be one here tonight who's not a Christian. Don't ever stop someone from becoming a Christian. Don't ever try to prevent someone from becoming a Christian. Maybe there's one tonight here that needs to make their life right with God. Don't ever try to stop someone from getting their life together. Don't get in the way of people that are eager for God's blessings. Plan of salvation, he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. Let's be standing and singing at this time.